When 28-year-old Emma Carter and her husband, Daniel, bought their dream home in the quiet town of Willow Creek, they thought they were starting a new chapter of their lives. The house was perfect, a charming Victorian-style home with a wraparound porch, stained glass windows, and a sprawling backyard. It was everything they had ever wanted. But within days of moving in, they realized the house had secrets. Dark, unsettling secrets. It started with the whispers. Emma was the first to hear them. She had been unpacking boxes in the living room when she heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur coming from the walls. At first, she thought it was the wind or the creaking of old pipes. But the whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were soft, almost melodic, but there was something off about them, something unnatural. Daniel laughed it off, telling her it was just the house settling. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The whispers followed her wherever she went, growing louder at night when the house was quiet. They seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing in her mind long after they stopped. Then came the shadows. Emma first noticed them in the hallway. She would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of her eye, but when she turned, there was nothing there. At first, she told herself it was just her imagination, but the shadows grew bolder, more defined. They would dart across the walls, disappearing into corners or vanishing through closed doors. One night, Emma woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding, and shook Daniel awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Daniel listened, his face pale. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving closer to their bedroom door. "Stay here," Daniel said, grabbing a baseball bat from the corner of the room. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway, Emma close behind him. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick with an oppressive silence. And then they saw it. A shadow, tall and humanoid, standing at the end of the hallway. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching them. Daniel swung the bat, but it passed through the shadow as if it were made of smoke. The shadow dissolved into the air, leaving behind a faint, acrid smell. From that night on, the activity in the house escalated. Doors would slam shut on their own. Objects would move or disappear, only to reappear in strange places. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the house itself was trying to communicate with them. Desperate for answers, Emma began researching the history of the house. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The house had been built in the late 1800s by a wealthy businessman named Thomas Hargrove. Hargrove had been a recluse, rarely seen outside his home. But rumors swirled about what went on inside. Neighbors claimed to hear strange noises at night. Screams, laughter, and the sound of chanting. Then, one day, Hargrove disappeared. The house was abandoned for decades until a new family moved in, but they didn't stay long. The wife went mad, claiming the house was alive, and the husband died under mysterious circumstances. The house changed hands several times over the years, each family driven out by the same inexplicable phenomena. Emma and Daniel tried to leave, but the house wouldn't let them. Every time they packed their bags, something would happen. A window would shatter, the lights would flicker, or the whispers would grow into deafening screams. One night, Emma woke up to find Daniel gone. She searched the house, calling his name, but there was no answer. And then, she heard it. A voice coming from the basement. "Emma." It was Daniel's voice, but it was wrong. It was hollow, distorted, as if it were coming from far away. Emma grabbed a flashlight and descended the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. The basement was cold, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. And there, in the corner, was Daniel. He was standing with his back to her, his shoulders hunched. Emma whispered, "Daniel," her voice trembling. He turned around and Emma screamed. His eyes were black, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice echoing in the small space. Emma backed away, but the walls seemed to close in around her. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, until they were deafening. And then, everything went black. When Emma woke up, she was lying in the living room, the sun streaming through the windows. Daniel was gone, and the house was silent. Emma never saw Daniel again. She tried to sell the house, but no one would buy it. To this day, she swears she can still hear the whispers, still feel the presence of something watching her from the shadows. And sometimes, late at night, she hears Daniel's voice calling her name. When newlyweds Sarah and Jason moved into their quaint two-story home on Elmwood Drive, they believed they had found the perfect place to start their lives together. The house was charming, with ivy-covered brick walls, a picturesque garden, and large windows that filled every room with sunlight. It had stood empty for years, but the realtor assured them it just needed a little love. Sarah, an interior designer, saw it as a blank canvas, and Jason, ever the optimist, agreed. They moved in with high hopes, blissfully unaware of the horrors awaiting them. The first sign that something was wrong came on their third night in the house. Sarah had just stepped out of the shower when she noticed a message on the fogged-up bathroom mirror. At first, she thought Jason was playing a prank. He often left sweet notes for her. But this was different. Scrawled in the condensation were the words, "Get out." Her laughter died in her throat when she realized the handwriting wasn't Jason's. It was jagged, almost childlike. She wiped the mirror clean, dismissing it as a fluke, perhaps an old message from a previous owner brought back by the steam. She didn't mention it to Jason, not wanting to sound paranoid, but the messages continued. "Help me. He sees you. Run." They appeared not only in the bathroom but also on windows, and in the reflection of the antique mirror they had found in the attic. The handwriting became more desperate, the messages more urgent. Sarah's nerves began to fray, but Jason saw nothing, heard nothing. Whenever she showed him the mirror, it was blank, the glass pristine. Sarah started to avoid mirrors altogether, but the house had so many, built into old wardrobes, hung in narrow hallways, even framed as decor in the kitchen. Her own reflection began to unnerve her. She felt as if there was always something just behind her, just out of sight. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, her reflection seemed to lag, her face a half-second too slow to mimic her movements. One evening, while unpacking boxes in the basement, Sarah found an old photograph wedged behind a broken floorboard. It showed a family, parents and 2 children, standing in front of their house. Their house. But the image was wrong. The family's faces were smudged, their eyes dark holes. Behind them, in one of the windows, a shadowy figure stood, its silhouette distorted and twisted. She showed Jason, but he only chuckled. "Old houses have old pictures, babe. It's probably a trick of the light." His calm demeanor did nothing to soothe her. If anything, it made things worse. She began to feel isolated, as if only she could see the unraveling reality around them. That night, Sarah woke up to the sound of glass shattering. She bolted upright, her pulse thundering in her ears. Jason was still asleep, his breathing steady. She nudged him, but he didn't wake. She shook him harder, panic tightening her chest, but his body was limp, his skin cold to the touch. Her screams filled the room, but he remained motionless, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling. Desperate, she stumbled out of bed, her bare feet crunching over shards of glass. Every mirror in the house had shattered. Bathroom, bedroom, hallway, all of them. Shards lay scattered like broken teeth, reflecting the dim moonlight that seeped through the curtains. But the fragments weren't empty. Each shard held a reflection that didn't match reality. Figures moving in the glass, shadows twisting, faces staring. She ran down the stairs, the walls seeming to close in around her. The house felt alive, breathing, its wooden floors creaking like joints bending. She reached the front door and yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were the same, locked, nailed shut, impossible to break. She was trapped, and then she saw him. Jason, standing at the top of the stairs, his body draped in shadows. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. His movements were wrong, his head tilting too far to one side, his limbs bending in angles that made her stomach turn. His mouth opened, but the voice that came out wasn't his. "Why are you leaving, Sarah?" The voice was layered, as if many were speaking at once. "We've only just begun." She stumbled backward, her back hitting the cold wall. The mirrors around her began to ripple, as if their surfaces had turned to water. Hands pressed against the glass from the inside, fingers curling and uncurling. Faces began to emerge. Dozens of them, all twisted, all wrong. Some were familiar, the family from the photograph, while others were strangers, their mouths open in silent screams. The room grew colder, frost spreading across the windows, her breath clouding in the air. Jason, or whatever wore his face, began to descend the stairs, his bones cracking with every step. She darted into the kitchen, grabbing the largest knife she could find. But when she turned, he was there, his face inches from hers, his breath cold and rancid. She screamed and plunged the knife forward. It passed through him as if he were made of smoke. His image rippled, and suddenly she was staring at her own reflection, the knife pressed against her own chest. She dropped it, stumbling backward. The kitchen around her was pristine, normal. Jason stood by the sink, his expression a mix of confusion and fear. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he asked, his voice genuine, human. She couldn't speak. The room began to spin, the walls warping, the mirrors shifting, and then the glass shattered again. She was falling, her world dissolving into shards, each piece reflecting a different reality, a different nightmare. When Sarah opened her eyes, she was standing in front of the old house, her hand clutching the for sale sign. Jason stood next to her, smiling, his eyes bright. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. She was trapped. The house had reset. The cycle had begun again. And from the attic window, a shadow watched, its reflection smiling back. When Michael and Lisa moved into their new home, they believed it was the fresh start they needed. The house was a sprawling colonial, nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac in the sleepy town of Millhaven. It was bigger than they had initially planned, but the price was too good to pass up. The realtor had mentioned the previous owners moved overseas, leaving much of the furniture behind, which only sweetened the deal. The first few weeks were blissful. Lisa spent her days decorating, transforming each room into a cozy haven, while Michael commuted to the city for work. Their evenings were filled with unpacking, sharing takeout meals on the hardwood floors, and making plans for their future. The house had an aura of peace, or so they thought. It started with a door. Michael had been in the basement, searching for a box of winter clothes when he noticed it. Tucked away behind the old boiler was a narrow door he hadn't seen before. The paint was peeling, the wood swollen and warped from years of dampness. He ran his fingers over the rusted handle, confusion prickling at the back of his mind. He'd been in the basement dozens of times. How had he missed it? Michael called out, "Hey, Lisa, did you know there's another room down here?" Lisa appeared at the top of the stairs, a frown on her face. "What are you talking about?" she asked. He gestured to the door. Her expression shifted from confusion to something darker. Lisa muttered, "That wasn't there before." Michael tried to lighten the mood. "Come on, it had to be. We probably just overlooked it." They decided to open it together. Michael tugged on the handle, the door resisting before finally giving way with a groan. Cold air rushed out, smelling of earth and mildew. They shone a flashlight inside, revealing a small, windowless room. The walls were concrete, rough, and unfinished. and the floor was packed dirt. In the center of the room sat a chair. It was an old wooden chair, worn and splintered. Chains were bolted to the arms and legs, the metal rusted and stained. A shiver ran through Lisa, and she backed away, her hands gripping the banister. "We should close it," she said. "Close it, and forget it's there." Michael hesitated. "But what if there's something valuable? The previous owners might have left something behind." "Then let them have it. I don't want to go in there." Reluctantly, Michael shut the door and twisted the lock. They agreed to seal it up later, maybe even cover it with drywall. But as the days passed, the door became an unspoken weight between them. Lisa avoided the basement entirely, while Michael found himself drawn to it, staring at the door for minutes on end, the handle almost seeming to beckon him. The strange occurrences began soon after. Objects moved, not in a way that could be easily dismissed. Keys placed on the kitchen counter would appear on the stairs. Picture frames turned to face the wall. Drawers opened just a crack. Lisa accused Michael of playing tricks on her, but his confusion only deepened her fear. The knocking started on a Wednesday. 3 sharp raps, always in the dead of night. At first, they thought it was the pipes, but the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. They would lie in bed, paralyzed, the knocking echoing through the walls. One night, Michael couldn't take it anymore. He got up, the floorboards creaking under his weight, and grabbed the flashlight. Lisa begged him not to go, but he was already halfway down the stairs. The basement door swung open on its own, the air cold and damp. He moved forward, the beam of light trembling in his hands. The knocking grew louder, coming from behind the small door. "Who's there?" he demanded. His voice came out thin, brittle. The knocking stopped. He reached for the door, his fingers brushing the cold metal handle. It twisted under his touch, and the door creaked open, revealing the empty room. Except it wasn't empty. The chair had moved. It now sat facing the door, and in it sat a figure. The outline was human, but wrong. Shadows clung to it, shifting and writhing as if alive. Michael's breath caught in his throat, his body frozen. The figure slowly turned its head, its face a blur of features that refused to settle. Its eyes, too many eyes, opened, each one staring directly at him. "Figure, you shouldn't have opened the door." The flashlight flickered, and the figure was gone. The chair was empty, but the chains rattled, moving as if something had just slipped free. Michael ran, his screams waking Lisa. He babbled incoherently, his words lost to the horror that clawed at his mind. They left the house that night, driving until the sun rose, their belongings abandoned, their new life shattered. They moved into a cramped apartment in the city, but the house never let them go. Michael saw shadows in the corners, heard knocking on the walls. Lisa found small doors in their apartment that hadn't been there before. Cupboards, closets, even a crawl space behind the bathroom mirror. One morning, Lisa woke up alone. She searched the apartment, her voice hoarse from shouting. She found him in the hallway, standing before a door that shouldn't have been there. It was narrow, the paint peeling, the wood swollen with dampness. Lisa called out, "Michael?" He turned, and his face was wrong. His eyes, too many eyes, blinked slowly, his mouth opening into a twisted, unnatural grin. Michael said, "You shouldn't have come here." The door swung open, and the shadows swallowed her whole. When the landlord found the apartment empty, he noted the door and the small room beyond. It wasn't in the blueprints, but old buildings had secrets. He shut the door, twisted the lock, and moved on. And somewhere, in the shifting shadows of the room, a figure sat in the chair, waiting for the next door to open. And there you have it. 3 true, unnerving new house horror stories that make us question the very walls around us. Sometimes what seems like a fresh start can turn into a never-ending nightmare. If these stories sent chills down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends who love a good scare. Tell us in the comments which story haunted you the most. Was it the voices behind the walls, the reflections that didn't match reality, or the door that should have never been opened? And if you crave more stories like these, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a spine-tingling tale from our channel. There's always another story waiting in the shadows, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you ever find a door that shouldn't be there, think twice before opening it. Stay curious, stay scared, and we'll see you in the next